My name is Rachel Seymour Keesling, and I am the Operations Manager as well as the Biloxi Chamber Director for the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce, where our mission is connect, inform, advocate, and develop. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, and I'll introduce them in just a second. Just a few things of housekeeping. The chat, you are able to use the chat. However, we want you to know that even if you send a private message to someone on the webinar, it is not private and it is all downloadable. We are recording this for a later broadcast, so if you know someone that would be interested in receiving this information, please direct them to our Facebook page for all of the respective chambers. We would like to direct you to the Q&A. Oops, I'm forwarded the slide. We'd like to refer you to the Q&A box that's on your toolbar. Please enter any questions you have throughout the program, and we will try to get those at the end. Today joining us, we have Ms. Adele Lyons, the CEO of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce. We have Tish Williams, the Executive Director of the Hancock County Chamber of Commerce, and Paige Roberts, President and CEO of the Jackson County Chamber of Commerce. And of course, the man with all the answers joining us again today. We want to thank Maura Hallmark, the Executive Director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Office of Congressional Affairs. Maura oversees the Congressional Public Affairs for 8 southeastern states. So we'll start with Ms. Adele. Do you want to give us a few remarks from the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. As Rachel mentioned, the mission of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce is to connect, inform, advocate, and develop. And with over 950 members across the coast, it's really been something we've tried to figure out how to do, how to keep you connected, informed, how to continue to advocate for you, and also develop your business and your professional development along the way here. So we've got a lot of virtual events. I hope you are joining in on some of those. We have 2 more on Thursday. Ryan Giles, one of our former presidents of our board of directors, is giving a presentation about the workplace and how to manage in this time. Ryan is a great speaker. And then we also have Amber Olson on Friday doing a CYP presentation. So take a look at our website and our calendar to grab some further information on those. Thanks so much for being with us, Moore, and thanks for the partnership, Tish and Paige. Appreciate everybody being on board.
All right, I'll just go in the order of who's on my screen. Paige, you want to give us a few remarks from Jackson County?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. And thank you, Adele and Tish, for inviting me. I think it's great when we all work together from one end of the coast to the other. As Rachel mentioned, I'm on the east end at the Jackson County Chamber of Commerce, and like Adele and Tish, have been trying to use this opportunity during the pandemic to establish the chamber as a really solid source of information and a real go-to source for advocacy and anything that is needed during this time. It's so unprecedented. One of the things we have coming up is on Friday, Jonathan Brannon, my Director of Development, and I will have a Facebook Live at 12:30 with Representative Jeremy Anderson, part of the Jackson County Legislative Delegation, about the latest small business money, the part of the $1.25 billion that will go down to help small businesses in small increments. So we'll have that available on our Facebook on Friday.
Great. Thank you so much, Paige. And Tish, what's happening over in Hancock County?
Well, we are gearing up for the reopening of our casinos. As we all know, some of our largest employers here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the Silver Slipper is going to be opening their doors on Thursday at 8 a.m. and the Hollywood Casino will open at noon. So this is a really exciting time for us in Hancock County. And every Friday, we have a chamber spin at 10 through the Hancock Chamber, where we're giving our members the latest update on anything that we have learned throughout the week that they need to know about. And that's what we're all doing. We're making sure, thankfully, through the U.S. Chamber, and the great resource they have been, we are now able to provide real-time, relevant information to our members that's happening at the national level. The most recent fact sheet on the Main Street Lending Program. Thank you very much for that. And also the sheet that you provided to us on reopening your business. That was a great handout, and we share that with our members. But this Friday, we're going to be focusing at 10 on the chamber spin on the reopening of our casinos. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Rachel, and let's get down to returning our businesses to work.
All right. Thank you again, Moore, for agreeing to speak to us. We know how busy you are, and we appreciate you putting this presentation together. So you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Rachel, Adele, Tish, and Paige, again, for the opportunity to join you guys. I always enjoy this opportunity to kind of get on with all of you and talk. And as a fellow Mississippian originally, it's always nice to speak to our friends in Mississippi. Everyone is talking about how and when a return to work will look like, but we need to remember that and recognize that there are a lot of people that just never stopped working, and they've risked their personal health to keep us safe, as well as the services and from grocery stores to whatever else it is, so that we could continue on as we are. And so for those who are on the call and those type of essential workers, we appreciate what you've done throughout this entire time. Now, when it comes to reopening America's businesses and America's economy, there's really no precedent or guidebook as it relates to this. I'll touch on some things that we're talking about when it comes to what we need to do to return to work, some of which are already happening, particularly in states like Mississippi that have already begun the process. But a few weeks ago, the White House released their guidelines for return to work. And this slide shows those guidelines for employers for all phases of the reopening. For those businesses that are just beginning to open or still in the process of preparing to reopen, some of the things that we're encouraging them to think about are the social distancing demands or mandates. Cleaning programs, employee symptom monitoring, and temperature checking. A lot of companies are either being required to or voluntarily conducting temperature checks already, but it's important to think about how that might be implemented. Sanitation cleaning will be imperative, as well as personal protective equipment or PPEs, such as masks. There are two other big issues that we're particularly pushing for more guidance and clarity on. One of those being the role of employers in monitoring the workplace for employees showing symptoms of the virus. And then what are the policies and procedures for testing and conducting contact tracing? These are areas where most businesses have never had any role whatsoever or know what to do. It also raises a lot of questions about medical privacy and what we might and how we might protect workers and their privacy, as well as comply with certain guidelines from both the federal, state, and even local governments. Rachel, I'll let you go ahead and turn to the next slide. Thanks. Now, the White House also released its guidelines for employers in each of the three phases of reopening. Phase one is kind of where most states are that have already begun this process. They're close to the phase one, or they're just getting in it. I know Mississippi's close to being kind of fully phase one, I guess. Florida just went into fully phase one yesterday, as effective yesterday. But I want to draw your attention just to a couple of things in particular. One being under the phase one, closing down common areas, and then strictly enforcing social distancing. These are important first steps to reopening and should be where businesses begin to think through how this is going to work for their particular businesses. You'll also see that there is a special emphasis on accommodations for vulnerable populations, those individuals who are 65 or older and or who have underlying health conditions already. We've also raised several concerns regarding employers who can conduct medical-based or risk-based reopening using factors such as age or underlying health conditions, and are providing reasonable employment accommodations, and who may face liability under existing anti-discrimination rules. We need to make sure that there's a safe harbor for employers regarding these discrimination laws. Also think about restaurants and bars, or for example, and obviously movie theaters and other places where business models require a lot of people to gather at one time. That's clearly not going to happen for a while, at least not at full capacity. Much like the casinos, there's going to be limitations on their occupancy rates at this point, and they operate best when there's lots of people there, thousands of people there. So we need to think through the types of special accommodations or programs to support these businesses as they go through this process and are trying to survive themselves. The next slide, Rachel. Now, thank you. Now, beyond the White House recommendations, the Chamber's thinking through other return to work issues. As I mentioned before, what's the role of employers in testing their employees, doing tracing, and then health monitoring. We know that some large employers are already implementing testing programs for their employees, while others are less inclined to do so. And think about the many businesses, small and mid-sized businesses, that simply won't have the capacity or their expertise to do on-site testing. We believe that something like this is going to likely require a pretty robust third-party tracing system, probably in addition to the normal healthcare providers, whether that might mean pharmacists providing these tests or drive-through facilities at major retail locations, maybe doing these type of drive-through testings. And then there's other conditions or concerns that are emerging as these that are emerging that we're concerned about, being whether these practices regarding testing and monitoring and so forth, whether these practices or procedures should be issued through guidance from the local and state and federal governments or through new regulations. As I've mentioned, there is no playbook for reopening millions of businesses while simultaneously fighting a pandemic. Yet there are those in all levels of government who favor a more robust regulatory approach and government enforcement of new regulations. Such a one-size-fits-all regulatory approach is simply impossible when talking about adopting safety measures for every business in the country, and would keep employers from implementing solutions that best fit their unique workplaces. Besides, it would ignore what we've already learned from the thousands of essential businesses that have remained open during this entire shutdown. Another major concern we have is the legal liability issue. The Chamber's Litigation Center, our in-house law firm, has already been tracking over 300 different lawsuits that have already been filed during this period in which businesses have been closed down. And in some cases, in some states, we're already seeing TV advertisements by trial lawyer firms looking for people to become clients. This isn't a theoretical concern. This is a real issue already. And now the type of liability, there's a number of liability issues, from medical to provisions and health provision liability concerns, all sorts of them. But probably the biggest concern for the business community is protection is with regards to exposure lawsuits, where a business is taking all the precautions that is recommended by the CDC and OSHA and their local health authorities' recommendations, but invariably either an employee or a customer or perhaps a vendor that comes in contact with a virus and alleges that they were sick as a result of a business that they went to, and that business not doing enough to protect them. This is an unprecedented situation that we're going through, and businesses want to do the right thing, but know that this is an insidious virus, and even doing all the right things, it's really hard to control its spread. Now, the Chamber is not asking for immunity for all businesses. We're asking, what we're asking for is immunity for businesses, in essence, a safe harbor, so that in cases where the CDC and OSHA, and again, your state and federal, local public health authorities have issued recommendations, and a business does its best to comply with all those recommendations, they should have a safe harbor for them against those type of frivolous lawsuits later on down the road. However, businesses that are grossly negligent and or willingly forcing their workers to work in unsafe conditions, they do not deserve that liability protection. They should be held accountable. And we're not asking for these liability protections to last forever. We believe this should be very temporary and we should revert back to the status quo after we beat this virus. But for now, we do need immediate, temporary, and targeted relief to give business owners the surety and the certainty they need to reopen and not have to worry about lawsuits, a year from now. We're hopeful that the next round of bipartisan coronavirus legislation coming out of Congress will include some form of liability protection for businesses. And Senate Majority McConnell recently, a few weeks ago, expressed that there would be no legislation that will pass the Senate without including these liability protections. Now, the next issue that we see and have a serious concern about is the patchwork of differing rules from federal, state, and local officials covering everything from face mask and minimum distance requirements to staggered work times and health surveillance. Businesses should reopen based on local conditions, but as much as possible, public health guidance around best practices shouldn't vary significantly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. To give you just an indication of how absurd some of this patchwork has been, we talked to a national company recently that operates in all 50 states, and they're currently tracking over 2,000 different requirements across state and local governments, including, for example, multiple jurisdictions that require temperature checks, but have different levels of temperatures as its cutoff point. So you can imagine if you're operating in one county in 100-degree temperature, you're fine. In the next county, 101 temperature, you're fine. But in the next county over from that, 99.5%, you have to go home from work. Can you imagine the chaos that's creating for these type of businesses? And, a lot of those are kind of those fast food chains, obviously, ones you could think of right off the top. In fact, to address these type of issues and concerns, we recently sent a letter to the president, the National Governors Association, U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Council of County Administrators, first urging federal, state, and local governments to refrain from converting public health and safety guidance into regulations that may further add challenges to businesses as they reopen. And then secondly, to the maximum extent possible, guidance should be generally consistent across all levels of government. Employers have already responded to this crisis by finding innovative ways to protect the health of their employees and customers. And we want to encourage even more innovation as businesses begin to reopen. You can go ahead and switch the next slide, Rachel, if you don't mind. But I'm just going to wrap up by saying just a few other things, and that is our team in Washington and my colleagues around the country are engaging with members of Congress right now about providing that legal protection, those safe harbors, and that if we can maintain the right guidance and adapt the best policies or the best practices of what's working without becoming overly litigious or regulatory in our approach to reopening. Lastly, as Adele even mentioned, the U.S. Chamber and Tish and Paige, they all kind of reference, but the U.S. Chamber has multiple resources on our website at uschamber.com, and we've created a Save Small Business initiative where you can access our resources and webinars, get daily information on coronavirus efforts, which are helpful, particularly as we look forward to reopening and returning to work. So I encourage those that are on the call today and the chambers as well to continue to share this information, but visit uschamber.com/small Save Small Business for more information about all these things. I think a lot of the webinars, those webinars that Adele mentioned and others are available on that website and stuff as well. So a lot of information for you to look at, use as a small business owner and employee to what you can consider and need to look at as you begin this process and continue going through this process and stuff. So with that, Rachel, Paige, Tish, Adele, I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions I may have at this point.
Okay, folks, I'll remind you to enter your questions in the Q&A portion of your toolbar. I have a question for you more. You know, as you mentioned, different states and municipalities are having different rules for reopening, but it seems like some states are getting a little ahead of others as far as the different phases they're entering. And some federal legislation may come down that kind of pulls things back or puts some processes in place. How would you advise businesses to proceed as their states enter into different phases of reopening?
I think the best and only thing that I could say at this point is to do as you know, the White House and guidance, but also what CDC and OSHA and those guidance. OSHA came out with some guidelines a few weeks ago, and those are on our website as well. That kind of lay out a number of the guidelines businesses need to be aware of, kind of affirming, you know, how are they going to enforce some of these guidelines? You know, guidelines, do businesses have to track the number of employees who have tested positive coronavirus? Is that and so forth. So there's a lot of guidance there. And so, Rachel, my best advice really would be to maybe go to our website or follow up with me afterwards, and I'll shoot you that link to those guidelines. I think that's kind of the best things. And then, you know, you have to look at what your governor and the local municipalities are saying. What are those guidelines that you need to follow as well? And at your very best, follow all of those guidelines and make sure that you're complying with all of them. And again, we hope and do expect that Congress is going to address some of these legal liability issues. They're both. It's got bipartisan support. Our Institute for Legal Reform just released a study or a survey they did a few weeks ago that's overwhelming businesses and people, Republicans and Democrats alike, agree that these businesses need some safe harbor so that they can operate as they reopen and keep their employees and customers safe. And again, the last thing they want to do is reopen along all the guidelines that have been provided by federal, state, and local authorities and CDC and others, and then have to worry about at some point down the road they're being sued because, and part of a class action lawsuit because somebody claimed that they were sick or contracted the virus as a result of that business. So if that would be simply, I guess, my best advice at this point, and continue to encourage Palacio and the senators and other members of your congressional delegation and even your state representatives. A lot of states are already looking at some of these limited liability issues. I know states like North Carolina and a few others have passed legislation and already signed it into law by their governors, limited liability issues for medical and healthcare providers. That's a big issue that, you know, hospitals and other centers are treating COVID patients on a daily basis. And, you know, they need some protection that they're not going to be sued later on down the road and so forth. So some states are already doing that, but continue to encourage your elected officials to ensure they address these liability issues and the regulatory burdens as well to try to make it more standardized and more national as well.
Maura, I have a question. So on that same vein, you know, many companies and organizations are putting together plans, written plans and policies for their employees to, you know, to follow, and how to, you know, what the process is for coming into the office and et cetera. To me, off the top of your head, of course, it seems the best thing is to have a plan. But then when you put that in writing, are you further providing evidence or lack thereof evidence if you miss something in your plan? And that, I guess, goes back to the safe harbor. you're making your best effort. But and of course, anybody can file a lawsuit, and then you have to defend yourself, which
Right.
is costly. I don't know if I have a question. I'm just, I guess, thinking out loud a little bit on that. And if you have any comments further to that.
I would have to go back. I'm not an expert on that. It's maybe I know that there's kind of resources we've provided that kind of show here's some of the things that you should or recommend that you consider doing. Maybe posting these notices of what you've done and what you're doing so that your customers, employees are well aware of those provisions that you've done. I guess, Adele, to be honest, I don't have that off the top of my head, and without kind of taking the time to look it up right now, I think there's a resource that kind of makes those recommendations or suggestions of how and what you might want to post and how to do so. I mean, obviously, every year we get those new posts by the labor department on workplace safety and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Rooms or whatever it is for all your employees to have access to and stuff. Again, this is a little bit of a different situation. Those are kind of required postings by the Department of Labor. I can't say that this is not a requirement. It may just be more of a safety thing that you might want to do. But again, I just have to say, let's take a look and see if that's a resource that maybe some of our experts have gotten a clarification from other authorities to do so. I'm sorry about that.
No, I mean, I think to me, you having a written plan is always a good option, and because it's clear as to what you're trying to say. And but then I guess I compare it to, and of course I come from a nonprofit side. Like when we keep our minutes, we know that our minutes can be considered evidence. And I know I'm digressing terribly here. And so in some ways, is it better to have less in writing or more in writing? But I think because we want everybody to follow the same procedures on how to wash your hands and how to, stay 6 feet apart and that kind of stuff, I think you have to state that in writing, and hopefully that'll be the best defense that you can have from any of this legal liability issue.
To Adele, I would agree. Probably more is best a lot of times, and those guidelines, having them on file, having them visible, so that employees and customers are aware that you're going through these steps. To me, I don't see it being a problem doing that. I'm certainly not sure that there's been any requirements or guidelines by OSHA or anyone else to post those. But it doesn't it makes sense. It sounds like to me that it would be a good idea to do it. At least to have it on file and ready to go in the event an inspector, somebody kind of came in to make sure that everybody was doing what they're supposed to.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see. We don't have any other questions.
I have another question. More, what's the latest update on the legislation at the federal level? We understand the House passed a package, but it doesn't look like it's going anywhere on the Senate side.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have a shot. The president and Senator McConnell said no to it. The Democrats introduced a bill last week, voted on it Friday night. It did pass largely along party lines. There was one Republican who voted for it. It was called the HEROES Act. It was done, and it was done without any bipartisan negotiations or talk. You've seen a lot of members of Congress on the Republicans, talk about this as a wish list for the left and all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of things in there that do need to be addressed. Extended unemployment benefits and pay and things like that. A lot of those type of things do need to be addressed legislatively. But right now, as we're trying to make sure businesses and others have the resources financially and others, legal protections and all that kind of stuff, so that they can operate and get our economy going, is more the priority. Again, some of those things do need to be addressed down the road, but doing so like this is is kind of what the view of the Senate is at this point. I know there were a number of Democrats who voted against it, kind of with the same message and so forth. So bottom line, or to answer your question simply, yes, the House passed a bill Friday night. It has no shot of moving in the Senate. And we don't expect the House or Senate to begin negotiations and implementing any new legislation or even using the HEROES Act as the basis to begin negotiations on until really after Memorial Day. So we continue to push, though. There are some priorities we push. Obviously, the liability protections we want in the next legislation. We also continue to push for opening up the Paycheck Protection Program to include, 501c sixes or 501c organizations in those bills for eligibility for the Paycheck Protection loans. And when you think about that, that's just another example of, we do expect the Paycheck Protection loan program to run out of money again by probably Memorial Day. So therefore, the next legislation, are they going to increase it again and stuff? So there's a lot to consider, but probably no real movement on anything until after the Memorial Day recess.
Thank you.
I do have one final question for you. Businesses are reopening slowly at a lesser capacity with a higher overhead of maintaining the cleanliness and the standards and practices. Essentially, employees are going to have to do more for the same pay just to keep the doors open. How do you see that affecting the landscape long term? And do we get on the other side of that?
Rachel, I don't have an answer. It's a good question. I was writing an article for a publication or for an internal publication just recently, or for the chamber. And I kind of made a comment in my remarks. Here in Georgia is one of the first states to reopen. And the reason I was asked to maybe write down my thoughts were because I'm here in Georgia. But, businesses under current rules are not allowed to have, it's different phases. And this, again, kind of goes back to the patchwork of regulatory or guidance at this point. So you think about restaurants in one state, they may be opening with, 50% capacity, or, no more than 6 people at a table and 6 feet apart from the next table, and then the next state is opening up at, with 10 people at a table and at 25% occupancy stuff and so forth. And restaurants, for example, if I understand correctly, really don't make money unless they're at least 75% at occupancy. So you wonder why or how are these businesses going to manage? And my best thought or guess is for the future, they're trying to get some of their employees back to working. If they got a Paycheck Protection loan, they've been paying them sometimes without doing even any work. So I think it's an opportunity to kind of get them back. I think they see maybe the opportunity that those increases and restrictions are going to open up the doors more to more. So they want to be open and ready to go when they are able to do so. And I think there's a little bit of maybe I'm just naive, but maybe they're doing it somewhat out of just kind of being a beacon of hope, if that makes sense. While we continue to go through this, and we're going to go through this for a period of time, and we're prepared to keep our employees and our customers safe as possible going through the proper guidance at this point. But we want everybody to know that we're open and we're here for you. We've been open for, perhaps the drive up, for example, I keep using the restaurants as an example. But, we've had the drive-up service. Now we're having indoor dining. And I just think they're providing more of a service to the psyche almost, and people's hope and optimism that things are going to be back, hopefully sooner rather than later, because they're not at full occupancy or 75% occupancy where they actually start making money, but they're doing the best they can. So I don't have a clear answer, but I'm grateful for businesses that do that, because I think they're taking a real hit to do it, but they're doing it for everybody's benefit.
Great. Thank you so much. I get more on these calls and I expect him to pull out his crystal ball and tell me what it's going to look like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
year
Right.
from now. So I apologize for putting you on the spot like that, but
No,
I just,
I can just
you
get
have a lot of answers and I expect you to be able to see into the future.
not a
Um,
problem.
I want to thank you for entertaining us today with this information and providing resources as well as U.S. Chamber. I want to thank Tish, Adele, and Paige. And if you guys want to make any final last comments to close us out, any comments from the floor? Adele says we're good. Tish, any comments from you?
Just thanks to the U.S. Chamber, the Coast Chamber, Jackson County Chamber. We're all in this together. We are a team, and this isn't our first rodeo, although it's probably going to be our worst, but we will get through it.
Wise words, Tish, wise words. And we appreciate it. Great partnership with these coastal chambers, great partnership with U.S. Chamber, and we will close our program out. Thank you all for joining us and have a great day.